Nightmares, those vivid, disturbing dreams that jolt us awake, represent a universal human experience that transcends age, culture, and background. From the child crying out for parents to the combat veteran reliving trauma, these nocturnal disturbances affect us all at various points in our lives. But beneath their frightening facade, nightmares offer fascinating insights into the human mind and may serve crucial psychological functions. To understand nightmares, we must first understand the structure of sleep itself. Our sleep cycles through several distinct stages: light sleep, deep sleep, and REM, rapid eye movement, sleep. Most dreaming, particularly vivid dreaming, occurs during REM sleep, discovered in the 1950s by researchers Eugene Aserinsky and Nathaniel Kleitman. During REM sleep, the brain becomes nearly as active as during wakefulness. Blood flow increases, eyes move rapidly beneath closed lids, and brain waves resemble waking patterns. Simultaneously, the body experiences atonia, temporary paralysis that prevents acting out dreams. This evolutionary safeguard ensures we don't physically respond when our dream self runs, fights, or flees. The neuroanatomy of nightmares reveals fascinating patterns. The amygdala, our brain's emotional center and fear headquarters, shows heightened activity during nightmares. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for logical reasoning, becomes less active. This explains why dreams often follow their own bizarre logic that seems perfectly reasonable until we wake. The hippocampus, central to memory formation, works during sleep to consolidate daily experiences, which is why elements of waking life often appear in dreams, albeit in distorted forms. Several key factors transform ordinary dreams into nightmares. 1. Stress and anxiety rank as the most common nightmare triggers. Elevated stress hormones like cortisol remain in the system during sleep, potentially increasing amygdala activity. 2. Medications can increase nightmare frequency, including some antidepressants, blood pressure medications, and Parkinson's disease treatments. 3. Sleep disruptions like irregular schedules, sleep deprivation, or conditions such as sleep apnea fragment sleep cycles, often leading to more nightmares. 4. Dietary choices including spicy foods, alcohol, and heavy late-night meals can elevate body temperature and disrupt sleep architecture. From an evolutionary perspective, nightmares may serve as a survival mechanism. Finnish neuroscientist Antti Rauvansio proposed the threat simulation theory, suggesting that nightmares function as a virtual reality simulator where we practice detecting and escaping threats without actual danger. Our ancestors who occasionally dreamed about predator attacks might have gained survival advantages when real dangers emerged, as their brains had already rehearsed responses. In modern contexts, our nightmares have evolved alongside our threats. Instead of saber-toothed tigers, we might dream of failing important tests, public humiliation, or losing loved ones. Yet the function remains: preparation for navigating life's challenges and processing emotional material. When nightmares strike, a cascade of neurophysiological events occurs. The amygdala becomes highly active, triggering the fight-or-flight response even while asleep. Heart rate increases, breathing quickens, and stress hormones surge. Simultaneously, the anterior cingulate cortex and insula, areas involved in emotional regulation, show increased activity, attempting to process the intense emotions generated by the frightening scenario. Dream recall is heavily influenced by when and how we wake. When a nightmare is intense enough to jolt us awake during or immediately after REM sleep, the dream content remains actively processed in short-term memory, increasing the likelihood of detailed recall. By contrast, dreams that don't wake us typically transition into the next sleep stage, often leading to that familiar experience of knowing we dreamed something but being unable to recall specifics. Despite the infinite variety of human experience, nightmares cluster around several universal themes that cross cultural boundaries, suggesting our sleeping minds process similar fears in consistent ways. Falling dreams rank among the most common nightmare experiences worldwide. Psychologically, they often relate to feelings of insecurity, anxiety about failure, or fear of losing control. These dreams frequently occur during periods of significant transition or instability, changing jobs, moving homes, ending relationships, or facing major decisions. The common experience of jerking awake just before hitting the ground has a physiological explanation. As muscles relax during sleep, the brain sometimes misinterprets this relaxation as falling, triggering a sudden muscle contraction called a hypnic jerk that can coincide with the falling sensation in the dream. Chase dreams tap into primal survival instincts. Psychologically, they often represent avoidance. Something in waking life may be perceived as threatening, triggering this dream response. The identity of the pursuer provides crucial insight. Strangers might indicate general anxiety, animals could symbolize suppressed instinctual desires, while known individuals might reflect specific interpersonal tensions. An undefined presence or shadow figure often represents aspects of oneself that remain unacknowledged, what Jungian psychology calls the shadow. Paralysis dreams or sensations of being trapped generate profound terror. These nightmares have a fascinating neurological basis. During REM sleep, the brain paralyzes major muscle groups to prevent acting out dreams. Sometimes, this paralysis continues briefly into wakefulness, creating sleep paralysis, being mentally awake but physically immobilized. From a psychological perspective, these dreams frequently occur when one feels unable to express oneself, lacks agency or control, feels constrained by responsibilities, or struggles to make important life changes. Cultural interpretations of sleep paralysis vary worldwide. Newfoundland has the old hag, Japan references kanashibari, spiritual binding, Brazil describes the pisadira, a crone who tramples sleepers, and Cambodia speaks of khmeok sangkat, immobilizing ghosts. Public humiliation or performance anxiety dreams occur universally, appearing undressed in public, taking exams unprepared, or forgetting lines on stage. These scenarios reflect fears of inadequacy, judgment, and failure, particularly common among high achievers and perfectionists. Neurologically, these dreams activate brain regions similar to those involved in social anxiety during wakefulness. They often connect to imposter syndrome, the persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud despite evidence of competence. Lost dreams, involving lost possessions, missing children, or vanished partners, tap into primal fears of separation. These nightmares often occur during transitions when attachment systems are activated, children starting school, relationships changing status, or following actual losses that trigger grief responses. From an evolutionary perspective, these dreams may help rehearse maintaining vigilance toward valuable resources and relationships. When dreaming about losing someone important, the brain activates many of the same regions involved in actual separation distress. Death dreams, either of oneself or loved ones, carry complex psychological significance beyond simple fear. In many psychological traditions, dreaming of death rarely represents literal death wishes or premonitions. Instead, these dreams often symbolize endings and transitions, transformation and rebirth, the need to release outdated aspects of identity, or processing existential questions. Cultural attitudes toward death significantly influence how people experience and interpret these dreams. In cultures with greater acceptance of death as part of life's cycle, death dreams may generate less anxiety than in cultures where death remains taboo. Disaster dreams featuring tsunamis, earthquakes, or nuclear explosions represent forces entirely beyond individual control. These dreams have become increasingly common in our era of climate change, pandemic threats, and global instability. Psychologically, disaster dreams frequently occur when emotions feel too overwhelming to be contained within everyday concerns. The scale of the dream matches the intensity of the feelings, even if the specific content seems unrelated to daily life. Technology nightmares represent a relatively new category: endless work emails that cannot be answered, phones that won't dial during emergencies, or smart devices with sinister intentions. These dreams reflect our complex relationship with devices that function simultaneously as tools, extensions of our social selves, and sometimes sources of stress. Recurring nightmares, the same frightening scenario playing out repeatedly, often indicate unresolved psychological material demanding attention. These are particularly common following traumatic experiences, where they may represent the brain's attempt to process overwhelming events. In post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, nightmares often replay aspects of the trauma with remarkable literal detail. ## nightmares throughout the lifespan. Nightmare experiences evolve remarkably as we age, reflecting developmental concerns appropriate to each life stage. Children between ages 3 to 6 experience peak nightmare frequency, with an estimated 50% having regular nightmares. This timing coincides with crucial cognitive developments, emerging imagination, growing awareness of potential dangers, developing theory of mind, and grappling with new fears as worldview expands. Children's nightmares often feature concrete threats, monsters under the bed, wild animals, bad people, or separation from caregivers. These reflect developmental concerns about safety, attachment, and understanding reality's boundaries. Adolescent nightmares frequently involve social anxiety and embarrassment, academic failure, loss of control, and identity concerns. These themes mirror the developmental challenges of forming identity, navigating social hierarchies, and managing increased responsibility. Adult nightmares commonly feature professional failure or incompetence, relationship difficulties, losing loved ones, or missing important deadlines. These reflect adult concerns about identity, responsibility, relationships, and mortality. As we age, our nightmares become more psychologically complex, incorporating subtle anxieties rather than straightforward physical threats. Elderly individuals typically experience decreased nightmare frequency, potentially related to changes in REM sleep patterns. Their nightmares often process life review themes, unresolved regrets, lost opportunities, and mortality awareness. These dreams can support what psychologist Erik Erikson identified as ego integrity versus despair, finding meaning and acceptance in life's totality, including its disappointments. ## nightmares and mental health. The relationship between nightmares and mental health is bidirectional and complex. While occasional nightmares are normal, their frequency, intensity, and content can sometimes signal underlying psychological concerns, or even offer paths toward healing. Several mental health conditions show strong associations with increased nightmare activity. Trauma-related nightmares represent one of the most established connections. Up to 80% of individuals with PTSD experience nightmares, often with content directly related to their traumatic experiences. In PTSD, nightmares occur during both REM and non-REM sleep, which is unusual, and frequently replay elements of the traumatic event with remarkable literalness. Current understanding suggests these nightmares represent the brain's attempt to process traumatic memories that weren't properly integrated during the original experience. Anxiety disorders correlate strongly with increased nightmare frequency. The relationship is often cyclical. Anxiety increases nightmares, which then exacerbate daytime anxiety. People with anxiety disorders often experience nightmares that catastrophize everyday concerns, mirroring the cognitive pattern of catastrophic thinking common in these conditions. Depression alters both nightmare content and dream recall patterns. Depression changes REM sleep architecture, with earlier REM onset and longer REM duration. This REM pressure increases dreaming in general, including nightmares. The neurochemical changes in depression, particularly involving serotonin and norepinephrine, affect both mood regulation and sleep architecture. Interestingly, some research suggests successful depression treatment leads to changes in dream content before subjective mood improves. Substance use and withdrawal dramatically affect nightmare patterns. Alcohol disrupts sleep architecture, particularly REM sleep. During withdrawal, the brain experiences REM rebound, a sudden increase in REM sleep that brings intense nightmares. Many medications also affect nightmare frequency, including some antidepressants, blood pressure medications, and Parkinson's disease treatments. When persistent nightmares significantly impact life quality without clear connection to another condition, a diagnosis of nightmare disorder, previously called dream anxiety disorder, may be appropriate. This condition affects approximately 4% of adults, with higher rates among children and adolescents. Without treatment, it can become chronic, sometimes persisting for decades. The consequences extend beyond nighttime hours, potentially including sleep avoidance due to nightmare fear, chronic sleep deprivation, daytime fatigue and concentration problems, mood disturbances, decreased immune function, increased stress reactivity. Despite their distressing nature, nightmares don't always signal pathology. In many cases, they serve adaptive functions supporting psychological health and emotional processing. Research increasingly suggests dreams, including nightmares, help process and integrate emotional experiences, preferentially incorporating emotionally significant material from waking life. Studies using sleep laboratory protocols have found that REM sleep helps reduce the emotional intensity of difficult memories while preserving their informational content, essentially helping us learn from emotional experiences without remaining overwhelmed by them. Some nightmares may represent this system working as intended, processing difficult emotional material in a temporarily distressing way. Throughout history, creative breakthroughs have emerged from troubling dreams. Mary Shelley's idea for Frankenstein came from a nightmare. Salvador Dali deliberately induced hypnagogic nightmares for artistic inspiration. Robert Louis Stevenson claimed the plot for Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde came from a nightmare. The uninhibited, associative thinking characteristic of dreams creates connections between seemingly unrelated concepts, potentially generating novel insights. ## managing and transforming nightmares. For those troubled by persistent or distressing nightmares, a range of effective interventions exists, from simple sleep hygiene adjustments to specialized psychological techniques. Sleep hygiene forms the foundation of any effort to improve sleep quality. Maintain consistent sleep and wake times, even on weekends. Create a calm sleep environment, cool, around 65 degrees Fahrenheit per 18 degrees Celsius, dark, and quiet. Reserve your bed for sleep and intimacy only. Avoid caffeine after mid-afternoon. Limit alcohol consumption. Skip large or spicy meals within 3 hours of bedtime. Establish a screen curfew 30 to 60 minutes before bed. Wind down routine signal to the brain that it's time to transition from daily activities to rest. Warm bath or shower. Gentle stretching or yoga. Reading something pleasant but not overly stimulating. Journaling to download lingering thoughts. Practicing relaxation techniques like deep breathing. For those specifically troubled by nightmares, keeping a dream journal beside the bed, using a small nightlight, and having a comforting object nearby can help manage post-nightmare distress. Image rehearsal therapy, IRT, stands as one of the most well-validated treatments for chronic nightmares, with success rates between 70 to 80%. The technique involves 1. Selecting a recurring nightmare. 2. Writing it down in detail. 3. Consciously rewriting it into a non-threatening scenario. 4. Spending 5 to 10 minutes daily visualizing this new version in vivid detail. Research suggests consistent practice gradually reduces both frequency and emotional intensity of targeted nightmares, often within 2 to 4 weeks, with long-lasting effects. Exposure therapy approaches work on principles similar to treatments for phobias and anxiety disorders. Writing detailed accounts of recurring nightmares. Reading them multiple times daily. Combining with relaxation training. Progressively exposing oneself to more frightening elements while maintaining calm. These techniques leverage habituation, the natural tendency of emotional responses to diminish with repeated exposure when no actual threat materializes. Lucid dreaming involves becoming aware that you're dreaming while remaining in the dream state, allowing potential influence or control over dream content. Techniques to increase lucid dreaming include reality testing, regularly questioning whether you're awake or dreaming throughout the day. Mild technique, mnemonic induction of lucid dreams, setting strong intentions before sleep. Wake back to bed, waking after 5 to 6 hours of sleep, focusing on lucid dreaming intention, then returning to sleep. For nightmares specifically, lucid dreaming allows consciously facing dream threats, transforming threatening elements, or choosing to wake up. Mindfulness-based approaches focus less on changing nightmare content and more on changing one's relationship to the experience. Upon waking from a nightmare, mindfulness techniques encourage noticing physical sensations, emotions, and thoughts without judgment. This cultivates metacognitive awareness, recognizing that thoughts and feelings generated by nightmares are temporary mental events rather than objective reality. For trauma-related nightmares, specialized therapeutic approaches include trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, TFCBT, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR, exposure, relaxation, and rescripting therapy, RRT, cognitive processing therapy, CPT. When psychological approaches prove insufficient, several medication options exist. Prazosin, originally a blood pressure medication, shows particular promise for trauma-related nightmares. Some antidepressants affecting serotonin and norepinephrine systems. Anti-anxiety medications for those with comorbid anxiety disorders. Extended-release melatonin supplements. Children's nightmares require age-appropriate interventions. Parent-involved approaches like drawing nightmares and creating new endings. Symbolic reassurance like monster spray or protective stuffed animals. Consistent bedtime routines with calming activities. Simple relaxation techniques adapted for children. Parental responses that validate feelings while conveying safety. Adolescents benefit from approaches connecting nightmare management to broader emotional regulation skills. Teaching cognitive behavioral principles. Dream journals with guided reflection questions. Group approaches leveraging peer connection. ## harnessing nightmares for psychological growth. Beyond merely reducing their frequency, many discover ways to work with nightmares as meaningful communications from deeper aspects of themselves. This perspective shift, from nightmares as problems to nightmares as opportunities, represents a particularly empowering approach. Dream analysis involves asking key questions upon waking. What emotions dominated the dream? Where in waking life do you experience similar feelings? What might dream characters or elements represent? What resolution was missing that might feel empowering? This approach views nightmare imagery as personal symbolic language rather than seeking universal, dream dictionary, interpretations. Jungian psychology offers rich frameworks for nightmare work. Carl Jung viewed disturbing dreams as communications from the unconscious mind attempting to balance the conscious personality. Nightmares often feature neglected or rejected aspects of yourself, the shadow, including capacities for anger, power, sexuality, or vulnerability that the conscious mind finds threatening. Jungian approaches involve developing relationships with nightmare figures through techniques like active imagination, a meditative dialogue with dream figures while awake. What initially appears monstrous often reveals unexpected gifts when consciously engaged. Expressive arts approaches offer ways to work with nightmare material beyond verbal analysis. Drawing or painting nightmare imagery reveals aspects not immediately apparent through thinking alone. Movement practices explore how nightmare experiences live in the body. Creative writing transforms raw nightmare material into meaningful personal mythology. Archetypal perspectives connect personal nightmare content to universal human themes. From this viewpoint, being pursued in dreams connects to countless mythological chase scenes representing the refusal of the call to growth. Recognizing personal nightmares within archetypal patterns makes them less isolating and more meaningful, not just private torments but participation in collective human experience. Existential approaches focus on how nightmares engage fundamental human concerns, death, freedom, and responsibility, isolation, and meaninglessness. Dreams of death or harm, while terrifying, may represent engagement with mortality awareness. Nightmares featuring impossible choices or responsibilities connect to the existential challenge of human freedom. We must choose and bear consequences in an uncertain world. Somatic approaches focus on how nightmare experiences register through the body. Practices include noticing where tension appears when recalling a nightmare, breathing into these areas, and allowing spontaneous movement that might complete physiological responses frustrated during the dream. This bodily awareness often reduces nightmares' frightening power. Spiritual traditions worldwide have long regarded nightmares as potentially meaningful visitations or messages. Tibetan dream yoga views all dreams, including nightmares, as opportunities to recognize the constructed nature of both dreaming and waking reality. Indigenous approaches often treat frightening dreams as potential communications from spirits, ancestors, or aspects of the natural world seeking relationship. ## Cultural and historical perspectives. Throughout human history, nightmares have been interpreted through diverse cultural lenses that profoundly shape how people experience these disturbing dreams. Ancient civilizations typically understood nightmares within spiritual frameworks. Mesopotamians attributed them to demonic entities, particularly one called Pasitu. Ancient Egyptians established dream temples where people could seek transformation of troubling dreams. The word nightmare itself derives from Mara, an Indo-European term for a female spirit believed to sit on sleepers' chests, causing sensations of being crushed or suffocated. Medieval European understandings predominantly featured religious frameworks. The Church viewed disturbing dreams variously as demonic temptations, divine warnings, or results of sin. Medical texts recommended physical interventions based on humoral theory, while folk traditions developed protective practices like placing iron objects beside beds or using specific herbs under pillows. The 19th century brought dramatic shifts with psychology's emergence. Romantic-era artists and writers became fascinated with nightmares as sources of creativity and insight. Freud's The Interpretation of Dreams, 1899, proposed that nightmares represented disguised fulfillments of repressed wishes, while Jung expanded these perspectives to view nightmares as communications from the unconscious attempting to compensate for one-sided conscious attitudes. The 20th century introduced increasingly biological and neuroscientific approaches alongside psychological frameworks. The discovery of REM sleep in the 1950s revolutionized scientific understanding, establishing the physiological basis of dreaming and creating laboratory conditions for studying dream processes objectively. Indigenous cultural traditions offer particularly rich perspectives on nightmares that often differ substantially from Western biomedical models. Many indigenous approaches view frightening dreams as potential connections to ancestors, spirits, or non-ordinary realms rather than purely internal psychological events. East Asian traditions integrate nightmares into sophisticated understandings of energy systems. Chinese medicine views disturbing dreams as potential indicators of specific organ system imbalances, while Japanese culture references beings like Baku, mythological creatures that eat bad dreams. Contemporary global culture creates new contexts for nightmare experiences. Unprecedented exposure to violent imagery through media, awareness of threats like climate change, and rapid technological transformations generate novel content for nightmare processing. Simultaneously, cross-cultural exchange creates hybrid approaches to understanding and working with nightmares. ## Conclusion. Nightmares, despite their frightening nature, often serve meaningful functions in our psychological lives. Far from random neural misfiring or meaningless torments, these intense dreams typically represent our minds working to process difficult emotions, rehearse responses to perceived threats, integrate challenging experiences, or communicate important psychological material requiring attention. This functional understanding transforms how we relate to these disturbing dreams. Rather than seeing nightmares as problems to eliminate, we might approach them as meaningful, if sometimes unskilled, communications from aspects of ourselves seeking integration. For those whose nightmares create significant suffering, effective options exist for reducing their frequency and intensity. From fundamental sleep hygiene practices to specialized techniques like imagery rehearsal therapy, evidence-based treatments offer substantial relief. The developmental perspective reminds us that nightmares take different forms throughout the lifespan, while cultural frameworks profoundly influence how we experience these dreams. By understanding these patterns, we gain insight not just into our individual psyches but into our shared human experience. Perhaps most powerfully, nightmares can serve as catalysts for psychological development when approached thoughtfully. Through various traditions and techniques, engaging rather than merely eliminating nightmare content often yields unexpected gifts of insight, integration, and authenticity. The darkness of nightmares, when approached with knowledge and skill, often reveals itself not as empty terror but as containing precious wisdom awaiting discovery. In understanding our nightmares more fully, we often find not just relief from their distress but unexpected paths toward greater psychological wholeness.